record to the cloud.
Okay, so welcome to this quick talk session. So the quick talk presentation is short presentations focused specifically on a practice, and we'll have 3 different presentations this session, and we really do need to stick strictly to our time limit. So I will ask you, if you're not presenting, to switch your microphone off, and I'm just about to pop into the chat a link to a Google feedback form. So if I can ask you all to click on that form, open that up, and we'll be collecting live feedback throughout the conference on all of the sessions you are going to. So I'll give you a time warning, presenters, just I'll give you 5-minute warning and then another 1-minute warning to let you know to wrap up. And what I think I will do, so that I don't eat up any of your time, is pass straight to our first presenters to begin. And let me just check that I have you all correctly. So I've got Sarah, Caitlin and Hugh with Disruptive Practices of Problem-Based Learning in First Year Medicine. Welcome and thank you.
Thanks, Julie, and thank you everyone for being here today. We'll get stuck straight in. I just want to explain the 2 images on this first slide. It's the logo, for those of you unfamiliar, for PebblePad, and I think this is a pretty good depiction of a problem-based learning room. And we'll get into explaining what problem-based learning is very shortly. But firstly, just to introduce ourselves. So I'm Sarah, and I am the Year 1 convener for the joint program in medicine, and I'm based at the Orange campus. Hugh?
I'm Hugh. I'm a first year PBL tutor with CSU, and I'm also a GP working in private practice and at Orange Hospital.
Hi, I'm Caitlin Bella, and I'm a first year CSU medical student.
Thank you. So we're each going to present our perspectives of how PBL rolled out for us throughout the different methods of deployment we had to operate in as a result of the pandemic. So just quickly to provide a bit of context, this is the first year that we have run the joint program in medicine at Charles Sturt University, and we are in partnership with the Western Sydney University. So we deliver the same program, but we have contextualised it to our context. So some of the PBL cases have been slightly tweaked, but in all other ways, we are definitely delivering the same program. We have local delivery happening as well with a lot of our specialist clinicians on site, which we're very fortunate to have. It is a 5-year undergraduate degree, and the first 2 years of the program really centre on problem-based learning. It drives all the other learning that happens that week. So all of the lectures and labs and tutorials are focused on helping students develop the content knowledge needed to progress their discussions within the tutorials. We have a really nice size cohort, 43 students, and a really good tutor to student ratio for PBL. We have 1 tutor to 8 students. In a lot of other medical programs, that's blown out. You know, sometimes there's 12 to 15 students, and it really makes PBL difficult. I think we have the perfect size at the moment, so we're very lucky. That definitely helps our program. And this year, for the first, our first year of operation, we had a really mixed age group. And so the mean age of our students in first year was 23. So we had quite a mix of mature age and school leavers. So just before I get into talking about PBL, can I have a show of hands? Who is familiar with what problem-based learning is? And any reactions from Brett, Paul and Matt, because I can't see you. Excellent. So most of you do seem pretty familiar. So I'm not going to go into any great level of detail, but for those of you unfamiliar, please just send me a message if you want me to go over anything in more detail. The main thing that I really want to reiterate about problem-based learning is the collaborative nature of it and the small group context. And it is there in medicine to enhance the development of students' clinical reasoning. So it's a process of learning, but also is backed by a really solid social constructivist pedagogy. We have 2 2-hour sessions per week for our PBL, and it is a typical 3-step model for those of you familiar with PBL. So it starts with a trigger, then patient history, and then management. So there's 3 stages, but they're done in 2 2-hour tutorials. Now we've used PebblePad to implement PBL. So we have all our cases up on PebblePad, so it provides a good visual, but also we have scaffolded the clinical reasoning through PebblePad workbooks. So as students progress through the case, they are prompted with certain questions to promote a deeper level of discussion, and it's in the elaboration of their knowledge that that real learning occurs. So the workbook was designed so that students could progress through their cases when they revise on their own, but primarily in the face-to-face sessions, it just provides a visual cue. The tutor is there in the room with them the whole time. If we ever did have to go remote learning, like we did, it was definitely designed for that purpose. So when students were out on placement, and if they were all in different parts of the state, it meant they could still log on and progress through the case with or without a tutor. So this is, sorry, I'm not in presentation mode. That looks very messy. Really just to give you a visual of what the workbook looks like. These were meant to come up individually, sorry. So there's the visual of the patient with a bit of a scenario. The student is placed in a role. If you click onto any of these top menu items, it shows you the number of cases. So students would click on the block, Introduction to the Human Body, and commence case 1. If you look over to the right, when you see case 1, it's broken up into all of the stages of the tutorial. So each of these cases is timed release. So students can only see the case they're working on that week, and they can't progress forward until they've finished discussing each step. So they wouldn't progress onto patient history until they had saturated the discussion about all the hypotheses. So it's a very systematic presentation of the case, and it means that they can't step forward until they're ready. So this is an image of some of the scaffolding, so some of the questions that are asked, and students can choose to enter in this information and then export it later for the rest of their group, but it is designed to be done as a form of revision. And this is just another image of the last page of the case. So students really have to summarize all the information quite succinctly. And we've also embedded, where possible, some videos where we have talked with other health professionals to get their insights on the case. So how would a dietitian approach the management of this patient, for example? So what happened is that we had face-to-face PBL for the first semester, which was excellent because it meant that real team bonding could occur, and the group climate and trust, the relationship with the tutor. That was fantastic that that was able to occur before, I think it was June. So in the mid-session, in the mid-year, most of our students went home, of course, and some of our students were living in Sydney. So when the semester recommenced, we had 8 students who were stuck in Sydney and couldn't return to Orange campus. So that meant we had to move to a blended mode. We had several PBL groups where there was only 1 or 2 students on Zoom and the rest of the students were in the room. And so each of our PBL rooms has a really large TV screen where the visual trigger is displayed, but now we also had 1 or 2 Zooms from the students. So that was the blended mode. The next mode was when Orange went into lockdown. And so we all had to go online only, and we made the decision for remote learning that we would not come onto campus for any pracs at all, because they could be done using other software applications. So we went online only. So we've had 3 different methods of experiencing problem-based learning this year as a first year of delivering the program as well. So that was challenging. Trying to wrap our head around how this was going to work when we'd never done it before, delivered the content before. There was a lot of quick onboarding of the tutors to get up to speed with how they can create their own Zoom accounts. And as an educator, from my perspective, just the degree of support needed of students and tutors and the rest of the team was challenging to manage the transition concurrently for different stakeholders. I'm going to hand over now to Hugh, who's going to talk about the experience from his perspective.
Thanks very much, Sarah. And I guess it's important from the outset to distinguish that although myself and my colleagues were referred to as tutors, in the ideal PBL model, we're actually not tutors at all. We're conductors or facilitators of self-directed learning, maybe with a few useful anecdotes. I'm a clinician, so I can add that clinical perspective. And all that works really well when you're developing rapport with one another in the one space. So that was one of the initial challenges with blended delivery, that I could develop that rapport with some of my students, and it was harder via Zoom, obviously, because I'd never met them in person. The idea with PBL is that it's very interactive, and there's use of various ways of compiling information that's not individually based for students. So we use whiteboards, we use the walls within the PBL room with whiteboard markers that can easily be wiped off. And it's really quite amazing to see the development of knowledge and the development of mechanisms and linking key concepts. Harder for students to be able to do that when they're online, because the camera can't be easily rotated around the room to see those boards. So the students took photos of those and uploaded them to the various mediums so their colleagues could get that information, but it wasn't quite as interactive. As a result of that blended model, I had to lead the discussion a little bit more, making sure that those in the room weren't dominating and those on Zoom didn't feel left out, etc. And so that way it was a little bit more stagnated and didn't quite flow as naturally as what I would have otherwise hoped for. And the other sort of technologically based thing is that the microphone sits all the way up the front of the room near the television. So where we were socially distancing and trying to maintain space within the tutorial room, not everything could be heard online. So that was a key challenge for those students. Then when we moved to the complete delivery via Zoom, it actually worked probably a little bit better because it was all uniform. Everyone was in the same boat. Some of those things where people might have been nervous presenting in front of their colleagues, all of a sudden they're in their own space, in their own dormitories or homes. And so the quality of the presentations really improved. They couldn't talk over one another because Zoom doesn't allow you to do that. So that was a good thing. It was easier for me to direct discussion to each of the students with participants that might not have been contributing as much. I could make it interactive, like Sarah was trying to do before, with a poll or a quiz, and the students really, really liked that, and it made it fun and interesting. Even when people were sick, they could be there, which was good. And it allowed us to set ground rules early about participation, length of presentations, etc. Obviously, the challenges, how do you make something interactive that's not really interactive? So one of the students came up with the clever idea of using their iPad as a ninth member of our tutorial group to draw mechanisms and things and sharing their screen constantly. And this is an example. There's Sarah and I and the rest of the gang. And that's being shared there on the screen there, which was pretty cool. And then that could be screenshotted and then uploaded to their Google Drive as a summary of the case, because the mechanism, as Caitlin will talk about, is key to each PBL session on a Friday. Then I couldn't tell if all my students were engaged. They seemed to be, and I hoped they were taking notes, but it was hard to know, obviously, because they're in their own spaces. I had to kind of direct the discussion a little bit more, simply because people were a bit more standoffish and conscious of talking over one another, and therefore I was being more active. And I had to really watch the time as well, because some students felt more comfortable, so therefore were talking for longer, and that could detract away from things like our mechanism, which was the kind of the pinnacle of each session, which usually happened on the Friday afternoon. So overall, for me personally as a tutor, either all in-person delivery or all online delivery presented the least number of challenges, and the blended model for me personally presented the most challenges for the reasons that I've outlined.
Thanks, Hugh. So today I'll be talking about the student experience. Let's look at the first mode of learning during disruptive practices. So this was my first experience undertaking a blended delivery mode. The top image demonstrates what I experienced in PBL for the first 6 weeks. Some of the students, including myself, were online via Zoom due to lockdown, and the rest were in a class with the tutor. During PBL, we would work through the case on PebblePad, as shown in the top image, and at the end, we created a mechanism. The two bottom images are different ways we tried to create them. The first way was via Miro that allowed all the students to interact on a virtual whiteboard. And the second way was via the students in the classroom writing the mechanism on an actual whiteboard and the virtual students following along. During this time, we had to be innovative with our approach to learning, and there were things that worked and other things that was a bit challenging. Next slide. So what worked? Having the ability to continue class during lockdown in our own workspace via Zoom, where I was at home 4 hours away from university. Also, there was easy accessibility to the weekly cases via PebblePad, where we could write what we discussed in class and review later. Zoom also provided a multitude of tools, such as sharing our screen, which we use for viewing the weekly cases together and during our presentations of our learning objectives. What was challenging? Well, as this was the cohort's first time doing blended delivery, we lacked equipment such as the desk microphones, causing a lack of communication from not being able to hear the students and the tutors in the classroom. However, later in the term, we brought in these microphones and improved the quality drastically. Additionally, there was a lack of physical presence, causing a disruption in getting to know other students in the tutor. Now, being at home and online also allows for internet connection problems, as we all know, causing disengagement when the screen freezes or no one can hear you. This also causes distress from wondering if you'll be graded appropriately for communication and attendance. Lastly, there was engagement issues, as being online, there was engagement issues as being online either caused you to be involved too much, where you answered all the questions, or not enough, where you couldn't talk from fear of interrupting. Additionally, when drawing mechanisms on the whiteboard, as seen previously, you could barely read the words due to camera quality and lighting, creating a lack of contribution. Now let's move on to how I experienced the online-only delivery mode. In my previous degree, I'd experienced an online-only delivery mode before, so I was prepared this time around. This mode of delivery I preferred over blended, as everyone was online. We got to all be on the same platform and build a stronger connection with my peers and tutors. In the left image, you can see the joy on my face as we created a mechanism that we were very proud of, as one student used an iPad to draw and all of us contributed. This was a very effective way and inclusive way to complete mechanisms, and I'd recommend this for online delivery. However, on other days, not everything went to plan. As you can see in the right image, the distress on my face and my comments about the Wi-Fi being terrible from the storm. So all I could do was sit there whilst they couldn't hear me and I couldn't hear them. Now let's dive into what worked and what was challenging. What worked? Well, everyone was online facing similar conditions, which allowed the group to work more cohesively and create a mutual understanding of the online experience. As mentioned before, there was easy accessibility to the cases via PebblePad, which provided a format and guidance to how the cases were presented weekly. Additionally, everyone was included evenly, and there was more engagement with my peers and tutors, which I really valued. Being able to ask each other questions and be actually able to hear back responses provide a useful tool for learning and encouragement to participate. Lastly, Zoom provided effective features for everyone, such as screen sharing, muting voices, turning on and off cameras, and being able to blur out backgrounds if there were any distractions. As shown in the previous slide, internet connection can play a vital role in our experience during class. If there was any form of disruption to the internet, it may feel like we can't engage and gain vital information for our learning. Lastly, the whiteboard was a useful tool for face-to-face. However, we compensated this by utilising PebblePad prompted text boxes more and allowing one person to use an iPad to create a mechanism together. Now, within this modern and crazy world of technology, the one thing that stayed constant was the positivity and optimism that learning brought. Each PBL was a good PBL because each student and tutor wanted to be there to teach and learn. One thing that we can take away is that through all modes of learning, from face-to-face to fully online, we utilise our technology and resources to get through the year, such as PebblePad. PebblePad was a constant tool that was easily accessible and efficient. When teaching our future students, always recognise ways in which you can utilise technology to optimise their experience and potential.
And I'll stop it there. I'll just flash these up because I know we're out of time. Thank you, Caitlin. You did a brilliant job. That's a good summation anyway. So thank you everyone for listening. Please get in contact with us if you have any questions. We're happy to chat about it some more. Thanks.
Thank you so much. What a great experience, and some really good ideas there that I think we can take away, particularly with that reflection on what worked and didn't in the online environment. I'm going to hand straight over to Shukla now for translating research understanding into reviewing a subject outline. So welcome and thank you. Over to you.
Thanks, Julie. Can you hear me clear, loud and clear? Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, sorry, I put on mute, but yeah, and I said yes, and then I realized I was on mute, so you couldn't hear me.
Okay.
But we can hear you,
Okay.
thanks.
Thank you. And can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. And I'm just popping the feedback form back into the chat for anybody who didn't arrive on time.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My intellectual colleagues. I'm Shukla Sikder from School of Education. Today, I'm going to present a paper titled Translating Research Understanding into Reviewing a Subject Outline. First, I would like to acknowledge the country. I would like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri, Naganwal, Gungunguwa, and Biripai peoples of Australia, who are the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which CSU's campuses and also my residents are located, and pay respect to their elders, both past and present. I would also like to acknowledge educators and children in a regional childcare center where I have collected my data. And also I'd like to acknowledge participant community people in this study. And also I'd like to acknowledge that my research is funded by Charles Sturt University. So this is the overview that what I'm going to present today. This is a kind of complex presentation because first I would like to show the findings from my research data, and then how I have translated this data into my teaching practices, especially when I reviewed that subject outline. So you will see that two set of findings. So first findings from research data, and then how I have used the data into reviewing practice, and then you can see another findings. So the title of the research project is about young children who are from 10 months to 5 years old. They are STEM learning, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Particularly, I'm focusing science, technology, and engineering in my research. So they're learning in the established cultural context across home and education settings. So this is setting the scene that what I think about research, teaching, and learning. I think they are not like individual component. They are interrelated and interconnected. So my research always inform my teaching practice, and I believe that through my teaching practice, students would be benefited and their learning would be enhanced. As you can see, this is just from my research data that my research is about STEM. Just one example about that, what children are doing in the context, and teaching, what are educators doing with the teachers, with children, and then learning that what outcome could be. So as I said, that this is interconnected. So my main research question from the project is that how can early childhood educators engage children and mediate STEM learning in regular cultural context? So regular cultural context means that what they are familiar with, what they play with, and what they're practicing in their context. So that is something not I am imposing to them, rather they are bringing their learning from their understanding, and I am just linking or collaborating with them in relation to STEM learning. And I teach early childhood subjects, but for this paper, I particularly focus on my mathematical and scientific learning in the early years, that subject particularly. And based on my research practice, research findings, what I have used, done that in the learning outcome and subject outline. So I have interconnected all of them together. I usually use Vygotsky's cultural historical perspectives, especially that what children learn in their everyday context, and that their everyday learning, how that help them to develop understanding for their conceptual learning, for example, science or mathematics or technology or engineering. And I believe that based on cultural historical theory, that what we are practicing every day, that is based on our culture, and also what we're doing in our practice that also inform our future, inform our culture, what we build for our future. So that is how I always work for, that culture is the main things that we are building every day through our everyday practice, and our everyday habit is shaped by our culture. And conceptual learning is not only that cognitive learning, is also about children's affective learning, which is emotional learning. And how I bring this understanding into teaching practice based on cultural historical theory, I think we need to create collaborative collective zone for our students, so then they can bring their learning into their practice. So that's how that we need to create a zone of proximal development for our teaching practice. So I have done huge literature review, so especially when I have done STEM research. So as the research I have found that STEM qualified workforce is needed in the future. This is one of the emergent important aspect in Australian context. And therefore, we need to start from early childhood context to teach children. It's not about that direct teaching, it's about through play, that how you could bring their everyday understanding into scientific learning. So we need to start from early childhood context. And as all of us know, that free play has a long tradition in early childhood education context. But this is the time we need to think something else, like early years learning framework from Australian government published in 2009, which focuses on intentional teaching, which means that in play. So before you always think about free play, so free play has a very good value, a very big contribution in the field, but we need to think how we could link that intentional teaching plan for children's learning in play-based settings. So what do I mean by intentional teaching? According to early years learning framework, it says that educators need to do modeling, demonstration, open questioning, speculating, explaining, engaging in shared thinking, and problem solving to extend children's thinking and learning. So that means educators need to have a well planned for their play. So educators will do their planning that what children could learn in the play-based context. So children will know that they are playing, but educators have that thinking that what they could learn from these play-based learning. And in this setting, I have brought my STEM-based research that how that could be linked with in this play-based setting. So framing the research questions for this paper, that after doing the literature review, that still we have limited focus for STEM education in early childhood sector. We have still long tradition. Educators cannot like focus on or cannot establish relationship between pedagogical relation and play-based settings. So that is another focus. And also it is found from previous research and my other research that STEM could have rich possibilities for children's learning and development in the play-based setting. So based on all these things, I have focused that why STEM research findings need to translate into teaching practice through STEM-related subject outline, and also how STEM research findings could support teaching practice through revision of STEM-related subject. So that's why I have used cultural historical research methodology. So what does it mean for me? It means that it will include child's perspective in research alongside the cultural historical practices in which they live and learn. So as I have said before, that I want to see that what is their practice, what they bring for us. It's just not that I bring something. So it's just kind of connection. So what they are doing in their context, what they bring for me, and also what is my motives, what is researcher motives and goals for my research study. So that is the combination of all the things. So I have done digital video observation, which is that I have collected data using video camera, still camera, and also field note. And then I have collected data from a regional childcare center. I have collected 50 hours video data, and for this paper, I have analysis video data in relation to children's STEM play, what I already published, what I have used for the subject outline, and especially I focused on intentional teaching plan. How I have analysis data, I usually do 3 layers of analysis, which is common sense practice, situated practice, and thematic level analysis. So common sense practice focusing on that when you look at the data, what does it means for you as a communal understanding that what is the cognitive learning here, or what is the active engagement. And situated practice means that what exactly happening in the context, does it make any sense to in relation to the research in relation to my study. So that is the particular focus. And when I do thematic level analysis, that is about that answering so what questions. So it's happening, the data is talking about something, the key concept. So what? Does it make any sense with the theory, or does it make any sense with the research question? So that's the combination of theoretical understanding and research question. So this is kind of a data. I just like to show the picture. I do not want to show the video. So I do 3 levels of analysis, and as you can see that in their play practice, they have developed, they did mosaic play, and then they produced Aboriginal flag, mosaic Aboriginal flag. And just I'm giving an overview that based on that play. So what is small science learning? That is also my creation in my PhD, that small science learning could be done in the play-based context. So in this context, children understand about the properties of materials, about the mosaic. They use the mosaic stability when they use the glue to start the mosaic on the hardboard, and then balance and weight of that colors and shape of materials. So all sorts of learnings I named at small science learning. And also I focus engineering. So they have a goal, they have consultation to each other, they did problem solving in the context, how that could work for a long time, how they do the design, what color would come first, which color should go to the center, and then construction and integration. And they have decided how to do that finally, and they have done the product. So based on that finding, I have very good research finding, and I developed a model, which is a 4P phases model for science and engineering. As I have said, I focus mainly science and engineering based on the chosen culturally valued play-based practice. And as you can see that plan phase, so this model is talk about 4P. So first phase is planning phase, where I have integration of intentional teaching, where educators do intentional teaching plan, that what kind of play they are doing, and then in their play, what they would do, what kind of play children and educators do together. And then what is the outcome? So do they have any visible outcome or invisible outcome? What kind of science or engineering learning they have learned, or they have any product? And then finally, they do the pedagogical reflection. So this is the model I have developed based on my research findings. And the argument is that educators are still not that confident to teach STEM education in early childhood education context. However, educators are confident about their cultural practices, and thus they could link cultural practice easily with STEM knowledge in the play-based setting if they develop a careful intentional teaching plan for their known activity. So intentional teaching plan is very important for my research. So how I have analyzed data. So I bring that research finding. I said that I have to have set of findings. So I have got that research findings, and then I use that data for reviewing my subject outline. Sorry. So I used wholeness approach, which is about dialectical interactive approach, which I can understand. I can focus the 360 view that I could link with teaching and research, so it could cover both ways. And then wholeness approach also include combination of contemporary literature, national quality standard, theoretical positioning, and research output. So as I have said that when I review subject outline, I include my research findings. So integration of research findings, contemporary literature, theoretical positioning, and earliest learning framework. So I have revised the subject outline, because subject outline, this is the new things that I have added in the subject abstract, that intentional teaching for enhancing children learning. This is the focus for STEM. I have added 3 learning outcomes in the new subject outline, which is about that focusing early years learning framework, and also the teaching strategies, especially intentional teaching focus for children's construction of mathematical, scientific, and technological learning, and how they could learn from everyday technology and also digital technology, and be able to collaborate and communicate professionally in the design and evaluation of resources for teaching mathematics, science, and technology in the early years. As this is the assessment task 1, what I have added. So for task 1, I have added my video clips in the subject outline so that educators, my pre-service teachers, they understand what is intentional teaching for them. So they have analyzed the data based on the video clips, and I have added question that one part is that critical reflection in relation to intentional teaching. So they have seen that what is happening in the context in relation to intentional teaching. So this is their first assessment task. And then the second assessment task, they have done the intentional teaching with children. So they bring their learning and their understanding intentional teaching. So they have collected data from the center for the second assessment task. And the third assessment task, this is the new addition for the subject outline, that they will develop a digital teaching resource specifically based on that model. So they have a specific intentional teaching plan. So they will produce they will design a studio, they will do a slow motion movie, make a slow motion movie, and then what would be the outcome, and then pedagogical reflection. So assessment item 3 is based on totally that model. And because this is available, so how many minutes I have? Can I ask?
You have about 2 minutes left.
Okay, I just want to show a little bit of the video clip because this is available in the internet. So this is public. So I just like to show a little bit that what my students did. Can you hear the sound? Oh, yeah.
You may have to unshare your screen and reshare it and tick the
okay,
share
then
sound button.
I'm just showing you a little bit because I have no time. I want to tell. Anyway, I don't have time. So they have created slow motion movie as part of these new revised subject outline, and that is kind of awesome. And they presented in mini conference in East campuses, and some of my colleagues also joined there. So that was very interesting. And findings for this paper is that pre-service teachers could improve their discipline knowledge with contemporary research output, and they could also access the video data remotely to understand the real life context in the COVID-19 world if needed. Pre-service teachers might be confident in teaching STEM as part of their everyday culture in their education settings, and also they could establish the pedagogical relationships between intentional teaching and play-based learning. And pre-service teachers might be creative and innovative while using research-based learning into their teaching practice. But because I haven't done how teacher could bring that learning into their teaching practices, so that is my further recommendation to do other studies. So thank you for listening. If you have any questions, you can ask, and Francis, and thank you, intellectual audience.
We probably have time for just one question if anybody has a quick one. No? Okay, well, we'll move on to our next presentation. That was fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. Just Julie, I wanted to tell you that you are part of the revision, so when I did revise this subject, so you are part, I invited you to check the revision and things. And also I'd like to say thanks to Dave to encourage me to present paper here.
I think it'll be really interesting to see how the educators apply this in their practice in the future.
So that is my next project, I hope.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to hand over now to Deb, Jackie, Jessica and Stacey.
I just need you to share, let me share my screen.
Have you got that, Sarah? Can you allow the screen sharing?
Yeah, that's ticked. One participant can share at a time.
I've just got host disabled, participant screen sharing.
That's weird. Who was talking then? Sorry, Jackie?
Jackie, yeah.
Jackie?
Jackie now, yeah.
Let me.
Ah, now I've got it.
You got it?
Yeah. Cool.
Okay.
Beautiful, great. So am I unmuted? Yes, I've unmuted myself.
Okay.
Fabulous, terrific. Okay, so I just want to talk about our particular, Jack, can you go back a slide for me? Thanks, beautiful. So this is actually a paper in progress and it's with members of a community of practice, and the community of practice was actually formed to respond to a need that was driven by external accreditation for CSU. Jack, next slide. So the first thing I wanted to do is actually introduce you to the members of the community of practice, because this paper is informed by autoethnography, and each of the members of the community of practice have actually responded to a set of guided questions about their experiences in the community of practice and what they've got out of the modules, and I'll talk about the modules, so the shared learning that each of these folks have undertaken within our community of practice. So myself, Deb Clarke, Associate Professor in School of Education, Jessica Sears, Lecturer in School of Education, Stacey Jones, who is a teacher from one of our local schools and also a master's student and a part-time tutor at CSU, and Jackie Tinkler, who is lecturer in School of Education as well. Jack, next slide. Okay, so one of the things that happens is that in this particular, I'll try again. In order for our universities to be accredited, TEXA requires that each of the academics in the university actually participate in scholarship. And scholarship involves making sure that academics are actually up to date in both their discipline knowledge, but also knowledge about teaching and learning as well. Next slide, please, Jack. So one of the issues was that CSU wasn't fully accredited for the 6-year span the last time they went for their accreditation, largely because a number of academics within the university weren't participating in scholarship. So one of the reasons of that is that we know that CSU it's badged as a university for the professions. We know that a lot of our staff are actually really highly successful people drawn from industry and in corporate positions as such. And when they move to the university, scholarship might be very different to them. They mightn't have had much experience in actually undertaking scholarship. So we found that for many academics, this notion of scholarship and the scholarship of teaching and learning was something that was quite foreign to them. And they found that it wasn't part of their professional identity and it wasn't part of their practice. So enter the HERDS modules. Next slide, Jack.
Oh, hang on. There we are.
You're right, we're there. So HERDS is a professional higher education society. So the Higher Education Research and Development Society of Australasia. And what the HERDS modules are is 5 different sets of, I guess, learning experiences that lead academics through the process of learning to design, implement and write about scholarship of teaching and learning. So what I've done over the last 2 years is actually offer facilitation of these modules to academics throughout the university. And one of the community of practice was this group that is presenting today. So what we did was we met every week for a period of 10 weeks, And we had online Zoom meetings, and we actually worked through each of the learning activities in the modules. And then as a result of that, what we've actually done is we've continued that community of practice. And now we're actually writing about our own experiences in regard to working our way through the modules. So today's presentation is about 3 members of the communities of practice experiences of both scholarship of teaching and learning, capacity building, and of the community of practice. So I'll pass on to Jess.
Hi everyone. So I actually started at CSU at the beginning of 2020 in a teaching and research position. And I was also in the process of completing my PhD that year. And I think when you start completing your PhD, you start thinking, well, what next? And so I was starting to investigate new paths for future research. And I was happy with it being the ups and downs, but I was really after that clear path forward. And when I entered into CSU, I was very confident in my teaching and not so confident with my research aspect of identity. And so SOTL really intrigued me because this whole idea of putting teaching and research together, and also that almost putting my money where my mouth was with that confidence in my teaching, actually being able to investigate, well, whilst I might be confident, is what I'm doing actually effective? Jack, do you want to give me the next slide? So I think one of the biggest contributors to the success of our SOTL group was actually the people. In a time where we were all a bit disconnected due to COVID, it was really lovely being able to actually meet and collaborate with other academics. And I think we had a really unique team. Everyone was from very different stages within their research careers and scholarship. And so it was really supportive, but also challenging. And whilst we were flexible, we also kept one another really accountable. And that really helped facilitate, I think, the success that we had as a group. Jack, do you want to give me the next slide? So what did I get out of this whole experience? I got a lot, actually. I think one of the first lessons that was refreshed and kind of really honed into me a lot more was how to write a good research question, which sounds really basic, but the research question sets up everything that you're about to then investigate. And I hadn't written one since I'd started my PhD, so it'd been many years, so it was really good to have that refresher. It also gave me a really new way of thinking about teaching and scholarship. Prior to SOTL, I'd always kind of been, here's my teaching, and then here is research. And it was really a great way to see how they can actually be connected to one another. It also gave me the opportunity to be a lot more innovative with my teaching. But I think the biggest thing that I got out throughout this experience was actually my ability to now be confident and be able to have ownership of being able to call myself a researcher. So that professional identity was a really big part, was a really big thing that I gained throughout this whole process. Can I have the next slide, Jack? So what have I done so far with SOTL? It's actually helped inform a research project. So this year I actually piloted part of it with the help of obviously the partnership that I have with Stacey in a hub project, where I was actually able to take some of our pre-service teachers across to a high school. And so I had this ability to be quite innovative, but also pilot a project. And I'm in the process of writing 2 papers for that. Next slide, Jack. And so what are my future plans with where to now with this after completing these modules? So I'm hoping to actually continue on with that project that I piloted this year. I'm also hoping to also do some research in another subject, looking at videos and reflective practice with pre-service teachers. And I'm also looking forward to actually putting together an application for a Hertz Fellowship. And I will pass it on to, I think, Stacey, you're next.
Yeah, lovely. Thanks, Jess. It'll be nice and quick. So a little bit different. I'm a high school educator and I've been working with CSU as part of the government's Hub School initiative for the last 5 years. So I've been working alongside academics at the uni as well as at the high school. And as a result of that, I've got some pretty strong professional relationships with my academic colleagues. And that was what encouraged me to engage not only in postgraduate study, but in this SOTL group. Next slide, please, Jack. So when I first heard about SOTL, I thought, what is that exactly? I hadn't heard of it before. Whilst I was really aware of the importance when I was at the uni of modelling effective teaching and learning to my teacher education students, I hadn't considered formally integrating SOTL into my practice, quite similarly to Jess. My teaching and research, when I was still learning about that process, I hadn't made the connection until I engaged in SOTL. So obviously as a border worker working at CSU, this was one very unique professional learning experience that for me, I didn't want to miss because it's very different to the type of professional learning I would have in a secondary school setting. And I suppose the one blessing for me during remote learning with COVID is, unlike a day-to-day classroom teacher on site, I had that time where I could go to the meetings. So that was one positive for me. Next slide, please. So as someone who isn't an academic, I have found working with academics a little bit intimidating at first, and SOTL was no different because, you know, academics have more qualifications than me, but the professional relationships I had through my border work really gave me the confidence to give SOTL a go. And what I realised once we got going with the modules and the learning each week was, whilst I wasn't an academic, I still had a lot to share with the group, and that I wasn't the only one learning. The academics were also learning from me during our SOTL professional learning. Next slide, thank you. Got one back.
I missed one, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. So what did I gain? I found the professional learning, again, very different to anything I've experienced before in my setting at the school. It was extremely challenging. And whilst we do look at self-reflective practice in the classroom in schools, I think the level of thinking, the deep thinking and deep self-reflection, and that really strong inquiry base in SOTL is what I gained by engaging with the academics in the SOTL groups. And I now have a much better understanding of the research process and the place that it has, not only in my work in the universities, but also in the school setting. So it's also enhanced the professional learning significantly that I'm sharing with my colleagues at school as well. It's helped me build a really genuine professional network at the university. And it's giving me a very clear understanding of how I can work alongside universities in the future moving forward, so we can continue to build that very genuine relationship and collaboration between schools and universities, ultimately to enhance teacher education. Next slide. Thank you. And then finally, how has engaging in SOTL influenced my future aspirations? As I mentioned, I'm about to finish my master's, and I don't think, if I hadn't have done SOTL, I don't think I would have considered moving on to a PhD, because I would have been thinking, well, what would I be looking at focusing on? Whereas SOTL has shown me that there is some genuine ways I can engage in further research and move on to a PhD to investigate school-university partnerships further. That's me. Thank you.
Okay, that's me. So I joined SOTL. When I joined SOTL, I just finished my PhD, and a bit like Jess is wondering, well, what do I do now? Now I've got to be a real researcher. So I was ready to think about that because I wasn't just a PhD student anymore. I've always been a teacher and always been keen to improve my teaching skills and to help others improve theirs, which is what I lecture in. So I was keen to find out more about what the scholarship of teaching and learning looked like and how that was different in relation to educational research more broadly. The SOTL program was really practical and structured, and it dealt with a lot of the how to conduct that sort of research. And that was really good for me as a refresher, given my PhD had been done part-time overtime. So the refreshing was really very useful. The timing of the program was perfect. We were freshly locked down, and with all the stress and uncertainty of the pandemic, the social aspect of the group was really important for me, and it made me feel like I was working with a group of like-minded people and not just sitting home by myself. It was great to find a group of scholars from a variety of backgrounds and experiences who are also interested in exploring this field, and sharing those ideas and experiences was a really powerful way of learning, and those different levels of experience and backgrounds, you know, really contributed to my learning. It was carefully facilitated, structured and guided, and everyone was made to feel welcome. Everyone was made to feel knowledgeable, and that they had important contributions to make regardless of their background or qualifications. The HERDS modules that it was based around gave it structure and a sense of academic rigour, I suppose. And a core group of us stayed after those more formal sessions had been completed, and we're still working together now and on our own individual projects. What did I learn about SOTL? We looked at the ways in which teaching and scholarship are intertwined and how they have real and significant impact on each other. It's something that we overlook, I think, sometimes. SOTL levels up that scholarly aspect of our work, which is now all a part of our EDRSs, and it's a way of ensuring that our teaching work has real impact for our students and that we're teaching them in the best ways that we can. It also makes us aware of the wealth of research opportunities that our teaching practice presents us with, and of the importance of doing that. We soon understood the importance of rigorous scholarly work in relation to our teaching practice, and how this approach helps us to improve our teaching and consequently our students' learning. And it also really made clear the link between teaching and scholarly work, that research informs your teaching, and what and how you teach can also influence your research. What are we doing now? Our SOTL group is writing a paper, as Deb outlined earlier, based on our own experiences of the program, but I'm also writing a paper now about one of my subjects and the ways in which I've applied research to my teaching in relation to the design of that subject. That's then led me to the development of a research project that is exploring the experiences of CSU's online students who live with mental health conditions, and the ways in which subject design can assist them to learn. And that could have real impact for many of our students. SOTL's also meant that I don't do anything to my teaching anymore without thinking about it in an evidence-based way. So although I still use my teacher's gut instinct, research-based evidence is a key consideration when approaching anything I do in my subjects or my classroom. My future plans, I'm planning more research and how we can better design subjects. I've really got into subject design for students, in particular with mental illness and other cognitive impairments. And a SOTL approach ultimately means these students will do better and we can help them do better. I'm also exploring further research into teaching learning approaches such as universal design for learning, which will assist all students at CSU, not just those with disabilities. The SOTL program also underpinned my plans to apply for an early career researcher grant, and fingers crossed for that, but that is also a SOTL related project. Our SOTL group will be presenting some work at the next HERDS conference and applying for a grant, a HERDS grant as well. And this morning I was successful in getting a Dean's Teaching Award, which will be the basis for an Australian award for university teaching next year. So that's certainly a concrete SOTL outcome for me. It's also landed me a secondment to DLT, which so the whole SOTL program is really built for me on what I was doing in the classroom right up to where now I've got a chance to have some real impact. Deb. You're on mute, Deb.
Sorry, folks.
You are.
So just in terms of the outcomes of the particular project that we've been looking at. So theoretically, what we're doing is we're using the communities of practice literature to be able to inform, I guess, the findings of this particular project. So what was it about this particular community of practice that we could draw on for future reference in terms of designing elements of professional learning? So one of them that's come out of each of the guided questions that the members of the community of practice have answered is that it needs a knowledgeable and personable facilitator. In other words, there needs to draw on that notion of making it a safe and supportive environment that's created by the facilitator, and essentially that the facilitator needs to know their stuff and be able to answer any questions that any of the community of practice members have. One of the things that we found was really successful is that we were indeed a set of like-minded participants. And I think one of the successes has come from that each of the members of the community of practice was really open to learning from each other. It wasn't like there was a hierarchical structure as such, that everyone was open to asking those questions and responding to each other's questions, which was really important. And the last thing was around this notion of collaboration. So in other words, really supporting each other. And one of the things that was really essential was the notion of respect, the respect for each other's ability, the respect to say where everybody was at in their professional career at that particular point in time, and that it was really a trusting and supportive interpersonal and pedagogical space. So you can see from each of the participants in the community of practice what they've gained from this opportunity to participate in this professional learning experience. I'll draw breath. Thanks, folks.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. And congratulations, Jackie, on your award. And when I hear about evidence-based teaching, I get a little tingle, makes me happy. So with that, I'll conclude the recording, and thank you, ladies, and thank you, Shukla, and the previous presenters from the joint medical degree for contributing to the CS EdX conference.
Thanks for hosting, Julie.
Thanks, Julie.